All right. First episode, boys, of the Cupdate. Um, we'll get it started off nice and easy with the biggest game of the weekend, Georgia at Ole Miss. Um, wow, what are your guys' initial reactions? I was there, but from afar.
I mean, I guess I'll start. I mean, we had a game at the same time, so Indiana was playing Michigan, and I'm like looking at this score line. I'm like, well, they're getting crushed. Georgia's absolutely getting crushed by Ole Miss, and I was like, I mean, for me, it's very nice because we move up because of that. So everyone was cheering "Go Ole Miss" at the stadium when they did the score update at halftime. So that was cool. Um, Watching the game back, Carson Beck may be the most fraudulent quarterback we see right now. I mean, I think we're having this conversation. Blaine was talking about it, but the amount of shit that um, Carson Beck doesn't get compared to Quinn Ewers is pretty insane given his quality. I don't know. I think Blaine can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, in regards to Quinn Ewers, obviously, I'm going to make this all about Quinn Ewers somehow. But so Carson Beck, what is it? 12 interceptions in the past 6 games, or whatever it is. Most picks since 2020. Matt Corral, Ole Miss shout out on that stat. Um, but the fact that Carson Beck has just fallen off the face of the earth after being preseason Heisman contender, and then it's like, well, the picks aren't really his fault. Like against Texas, he had one batted in the air. He had one that's just a great play by Andrew Makuba. Last week against Florida, he has a couple more that just end up floating. But I mean, against Ole Miss, like that game sealing pick, like it's just a bad throw. Like these are just ill advised decisions that he's making. You can blame the rain. He can't hold on to the ball in the pocket. He drops the ball too much. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, at least from my perspective, was the Ole Miss offense moving the ball on Georgia like they did. Especially after you see Jackson Dart go out of the game. Like I get the notification Jackson Dart goes to the locker room. I'm like, well, it's probably over now. He comes back out. They're firing on all cylinders. He put up 28, and it could have been more. They settle for field goals there in the red zone. I mean, Ole Miss finally puts things together. We saw it against Arkansas the week before, 63 in Fayetteville. I mean, they're a dangerous team. Number 2 in the AP poll now, legit CFP contender in Ole Miss.
Yeah, definitely a signature win for our program for Lane Kiffin. It was exciting to say the least. Very exciting. Like you said, you see Dart go down, your heart kind of drops a little bit. Um, you get real nervous. You see him, you're like, I don't know if he's coming back. I don't know what's going to happen. But especially those first 3 games when we're playing like Georgia Southern, you get to see a little bit of Austin Simmons. We know we can ball, and he came in and might be underlooked. One of the biggest drives of the season to get us back in that game against Georgia instead of going down, back to back drives early. He drives us down the field with a couple. We got lucky on the one that got tipped, but other than that, made some real good decisions. Threw a ball in the slot to Caden Lee, just right in the breadbasket between 3 defenders. You're not going to see a ball better than that from almost anybody in the country. So I think after he did that, got us all fired up right back in the game. There was no chance we were going to lose from there.
Where did the goalpost end up going? That's the real
Um,
question you want to answer.
so both came down simultaneously. Stadium was on fire. They took it up to the top of the stadium, and they were going to throw it off the top of the stadium. They elected not to, and then the 4 brain cells of our student section decided to rip it in half, and then would carry it all the way to the square. Some of it ended up in bars. Eventually ended up on our courthouse in the middle of the square. So really happy for our students. It's a long walk though. I'll give them that, like a couple miles to get there. So a long journey.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering because Indiana, we don't really rush the field for anything. We have this elitist mentality in basketball that we should never rush the field or rush the court because we're always the favorite and we should expect that. And then football this season, we really haven't played anyone good, and then everyone was like, "Oh, we're gonna rush the field when we play Michigan," and then Michigan's been terrible. So it's been one of those things. I'm always curious what that experience is like for y'all. because I've never had that.
I mean, we rushed early. We got a little excited. Um, so I mean, shoot, I got to do it twice in one game. Not many people could say that. Uh, but yeah, it's like there's no real way. You just like Dart said in the post game interview, you just kind of black out. You just run out there. You're just looking for anything to grab, anyone to see, any player to high five. You're just recording everything. Um, it's just pure chaos at all times. And I wish that somebody at any college gets to experience that at least once in their career. Blaine,
Well,
have you been a part of one, Blaine, over at Texas?
So we are similar in our elitist mentality to IU basketball. Texas football, there's a stat we have not rushed the field since 1990. So it's been a while. They whenever they remodeled the stadium, they put the seats elevated like 10 feet above the playing surface to try to discourage from rushing, I guess. Um, but if we had come back and beaten Georgia in that game, we were determined that we were going to go. Obviously, it doesn't work out like that. I mean, that's how she
Mhm.
goes. Some of my friends have talked about how, like for Alabama in 22, like it was a predetermined thing. If Reichard misses that kick, they're going, But again, like I guess similar to what Turner said about Indiana, it's like we have a mentality of well, we're superior to everybody else, which as a fan of field stormings and court stormings, I hate. But I mean, I get it, I guess. Speaking
um,
of Texas, are we on to Texas, Florida now?
yeah, I think that's a
Let's do
good
it.
transition.
All right. So, y'all's thoughts? Do y'all have anything before I go full like Quinn Ewers meat riding?
I mean, I think I don't know. I was shocked that it was this big of a gap. I mean, I thought Florida was a decent team. Um, I mean, Ewers went 19 for 27 for 333 yards with 5 touchdowns. I'm looking over at my notes here. That's pretty. I mean that's Heisman caliber stuff. If there isn't Genty and Travis Hunter right now, I think Ewers would be in that conversation. He's kind of unlucky in that regard. Um, of course, you never know how the rest of the season will shake out, but it's a great stat line. Clearly, dominance by Texas. I would say they're probably one of the favorites going into the CFP, and I think this just is another kind of thing to be on their checklist for the future.
I just think it was real funny. I saw this photo of the TV stream, and it said we like from their AD. It said we are not looking to fire Billy Napier, and you look down at the scoreboard, and it's 42-0. And the same, I'm trying to figure out like, sure, his buyout's expensive, man, but like, how much can you like this guy? How long can you continue to trust a guy like that cannot produce?
I mean, I completely I saw that same screen grab of the TV screen, and I mean, you can't help but laugh. Like it or not, the Florida team, what we saw against Georgia, like they were showing progress. Like we were expecting Florida to maybe be a 1-11 team, like early in the season. We didn't know if they could beat teams like UCF. I mean, you get to 4-4, you play a close game against Georgia, and then I mean, part of it is just DJ Lagway not being able to play, right? I mean, you lost Graham Mertz earlier in the season. A lot of us thought DJ Lagway was the better option at quarterback to begin with, so he finally gets to play. He's a playmaker. We were sitting watching warm-ups. DJ Lagway's in pads. He's throwing with the team. I thought he might give it a go, but luckily, I guess for Texas, he didn't. How much does he change things? Maybe 7 or 14 points. I mean, Quinn Ewers, like Turner said, 333 yards, 19 to 27 through the air. The biggest difference was we didn't see the ill-advised throws. There was one early in the game that probably should have been picked off. He didn't see a defender over the middle. But besides that, pocket presence has improved. You feel like probably during the bye week he was able to get a little bit healthier. That oblique was still messing with him maybe against Vanderbilt. He wasn't fully comfortable, obviously, against OU or Georgia. Like he was kind of a statue in the pocket those two games. It was nice to see him come back against Vandy. He has bad luck on the two bad interceptions, but I mean, yesterday on it. This was the Quinn Ewers we saw against Michigan, the Quinn Ewers we thought we'd see all season. So as far as Heisman goes, he's probably out of it, honestly. With the way that he played those in the middle of the season, it's pretty well done. But as far as Texas's aspirations, SEC championship, national championship, this is the Quinn Ewers we need to see, and this is also the Texas defense we need to see. Because I'm putting this defense against any other team in the nation. You could argue Ohio State, you could argue Tennessee. Ole Miss holds Georgia to 10. Yeah, I'll give Ole Miss a shout out to that one, but it's Carson Beck. It's Carson Beck, like we talked about. But I'm putting the Texas defense against anybody. I think on a neutral field, they hold any team to less than 20 points. Now, Arkansas is an interesting game this week, but we'll see what happens. But Quinn Ewers is back. Texas is back. Top 3 in the CFP upcoming on Tuesday.
I think it was only a matter of time until Quinn got settled, getting a little bit healthier. So I'll give him props for that. He's starting to get into, mid to late season form here. A little bit scared, but like you said, I think I would put my defense up against anybody in the country, and I would love to see Texas Ole Miss matchup at some point, um, and just see some old fashioned defensive football. Um, I think it's possible. I think we could see that game. I would love to see that game, and I know where my money will be, but. Um, I think it would just be like a legacy game for the ages to have that matchup. So
Yeah, just quickly on that Billy Napier point. Do we think that the connection with Lagway is why Florida is keeping him around, and that they could build a team around Lagway in the future? The kid's only 19. There's a lot of hope in that fan base. Obviously the SEC is a heck of a ton stronger, but I'm wondering if there's some sort of connection that we don't know, where if Napier leaves, Lagway goes too, and I don't think Florida wants that. But
I think
I'm kind of with y'all. I think Florida's been it's kind of been a foregone conclusion that Billy Napier was going to go from the start of the season. So it's interesting that he hasn't already gone, but we'll see in the coming weeks.
I think Lagway is great or good, but he has the potential to be great. He's just obviously with how young he is. He's incredibly raw, and going down hurts, but the experience over time, I think there's a lot. His ceiling is pretty high with the athleticism there. So I'm very curious to see how that'll pan out.
Well, on to the next matchup of the week. Obviously down in Death Valley, Bama LSU. This was a CFP kind of, I would say, elimination game at this point. Both these teams had 2 losses. Obviously, the SEC is pretty stacked, but I think we kind of knew going into this week. It was kind of winner go home for one of these teams as far as the CFP goes. And LSU kind of goes out and lays a goose egg. I think you can talk to people as far as who are LSU fans. That was not the best game they played all year by any means. And against a weak Bama team, I think it was frankly disappointing given the clear home field advantage of Death Valley at night that they were given.
Yeah, personally, I had Alabama in that game, but obviously to a much tighter game than we watched last night. Wow, LSU sucks. It's hard for me to say that since we lost to them, but they looked horrible all game at all levels. Special teams, offense, defense was rough all the way around. Hard to watch. Stadium emptied out early. Can't blame them. Just really, really rough loss.
For sure. The fall off from what we saw that USC LSU game the first week of the season, we were all like, well, these are 2 teams that could play again, maybe in the CFP in a 7-10 game or something. We thought Miller Moss, Garrett Nussmeier are Heisman contenders. You look up, SC's 5-4 now, 4-5, I think, and LSU, since the A&M game, has not been the same team. It's incredibly funny that for a school who just had Jaden Daniels, an elite running quarterback, drafted second overall in the NFL draft, to have their defense's kryptonite be a quarterback with functioning legs, because Marcel Reed and Jalen Milroe have completely dominated this LSU defense. You look at the distance on the scoring touchdowns for Jalen Milroe last night: 39 yards, 10 yards, 19 yards, 72 yards. and then the stadium empties out, like you said, Eli. So, I mean, LSU, you got to figure something out for Brian Kelly. You can't win a big game. That's been the indictment of him his entire coaching career, right? I don't know where they go from here. I mean, Garrett Nussmeier's great, but like that drive opening the second half, you can't throw that pick on the goal line, man. Like
Mhm.
that's just a killer. You're about to cut it to a one score game, and then that's just a heartbreaker, you know. So figure out Garrett Nussmeier. You got to figure out the defense again. It's still an improved LSU defense, but there's definitely a lot that the Tigers still have to figure out to be able to compete with the Georgias, Ole Misses. Even though they beat Ole Miss this year, to be able to
Good
compete
enough.
on a consistent basis
Mhm.
with the top end teams in the SEC.
I'm curious to see from here how LSU reacts, and now that they're out of the playoff chase, for say, how do they finish the season? Do they continue to lay an egg, or do they fight to stay at a 3 or 4 loss team? Um, I'm just very curious to see. I think they fight, but I just don't see them winning very many games with how tough their schedule is left. I think it's going to be a steep drop off here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the thing that's a really notable stat is that for all six of those touchdowns, Bama has a very good receiving core, but all six were rushing touchdowns, and I think that's really what separates these elite teams from the kind of middle teams is the ability to stop the run. If you look at who's in the top 10 right now, I would guess the majority of those teams have phenomenal run defenses, and I know for a fact most of them do. Um, and I think that the run defense from LSU was terrible. I mean, Blaine mentioned it. Some of those rushing, touchdowns from Milrow were absurd. I mean, he rushed for 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's pretty unheard of against a team that's theoretically pretty good. So I think LSU's got to figure out that run defense, obviously, and they kind of got to go back to the drawing board for next year. See what they can do against probably the strongest conference by a mile in college football. And I'm saying that as somebody who has a team in the Big Ten. I mean, we have a great conference, but it's not like you know Florida and Oklahoma are two of the weaker teams in the SEC right now. But those are teams that can beat anyone on a given week. And I don't think we have Rutgers, right? And Rutgers is not beating anyone on a given week.
I think the biggest sign, if we're going to talk about the SEC as a conference, was Kirby Smart post game after Ole Miss talking about, well, now you have 2 losses, Kirby. Where do you go from here? And he's like, well, that's just the SEC. And you're talking to a guy who's lost, what is it, 2 regular season games in the past 3 seasons. He just lost a second this year. So I mean, if Kirby Smart of two-time national champion Georgia, who's been running the table throughout this conference regularly, is now talking like, well, you got to get by with 1, 2, maybe 3 conference losses, and you could still be a CFP contender. I mean, it's a testament to the strength of the conference. Absolutely, that the class of not only the league but the sport is talking about how you have to be able to take losses in the conference.
Well, do we have any other major football news from this week that you guys are really thinking about? Um,
I'm just randomly going to put this out there. Going back to the 4 rushing touchdowns against Bama, for Milrow, put an early draft analysis on him. I'm going to put a direct comparison to Jalen Hurts. Large quarterback, fast, maybe slightly more aggressive in the run game, but I feel like if I was an NFL team looking at it, I'm seeing large glimpses of Jalen Hurts, and I'd be excited to draft a guy like that.
I like that take. I'm a fan of that take. Well, as this week has shaken out, I think we move into, today the AP poll came out, but really everyone knows the real rankings come out Tuesday night. So, what are y'all thinking about the college football bracket? Who's shaking out where? What are we looking at for the future here?
I think the first real interesting thing we have to look at is how far Georgia and Miami fall, right? We saw them, AP poll drops both out of the top 10. You look at Georgia at 11, Miami at 12. Um, so how far do they go down? Are they still in that at-large territory ahead of a Boise State? But now they're on the fringes. And I think also reaction to that is how high does Ole Miss go with the two losses to two teams that are no longer in the CFP hunt, right? But you have that signature win against Georgia. How much is the committee going to weigh that against what they've already seen? And then I'm a big Army guy. I mean, I love those service academies. I think Army was disrespected in those first rankings. 25 is way too low. They're 16 in the AP poll. They beat a North Texas team that was averaging over 40 points a game, 14-3. So I mean, the ability to control the game is there for Army. I'm going to pick them over Notre Dame in a couple weeks whenever they play. That's just how it works. Um, but besides that, I mean, what do we do with SMU? What do we do with BYU? These are unbeaten teams that we're still not really sure on in those conferences like the Big 12 and ACC. I think how high those teams are, especially BYU coming off that controversial escape from Salt Lake City, is going to be interesting to see where they climb to.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of with you on these unbeaten teams. I don't know. I'm wondering what the ACC is going to do. To me, it just seems like such a weak conference. I mean, is there a reality where you know another conference gets a bid in the future? You know how this shakes out in the future, because I can't see the ACC. It feels odd for the ACC and the Big 12 to get these bids when clearly these programs are playing relatively easy schedules and then still getting losses. Miami's getting a loss against Georgia Tech, and then BYU, who have they played really? I mean, they have some ranked wins, but I wonder what the future holds for them. Um, and I wonder what that Big 12 championship will be like this year. And
I'm
is Colorado playing in that Big 12 championship is another question that people are going to ask.
taking it back to TCU in the playoffs, right? Team that you're not really sure, like, yep, they're a good team. They make it from a smaller conference. They play well, but then they get their ass whooped by Georgia, six like whooped. And so, like, I think some of these teams, like a BYU, 9-0, like it's hard to be 9-0, right? It's really hard to win 9 games, no matter who you're playing. But some of those teams are going to get exposed, in my belief, by a Big Ten SEC team that maybe has a loss or two that may not be as highly ranked, but they might go out and get their ass whooped. Uh, Maybe I'm wrong. That's my take. I would love to see America's Team Army. That is just something the entire country can get behind that unless they're playing your team. Um, I think if they went out, there's no reason they should leave them out at all with their, like what Blaine said, their ability to control football games and how, I mean, the scoreboard doesn't really look like it, but they go out and dominate football games in the way that they want to play. They make the other team play their brand of football, and it has worked. And so I think if they continue to do that, you cannot leave Army out.
I'm going to jump back to BYU for just a second because I liked what Eli brought up with the TCU comparison. Now, I mean, BYU has a win. I mean, that's a good win against SMU. It's gotten better over the course of the season, but you look back, that's week 2. That's before SMU made the quarterback change. I mean, you can say that a lot of things change. Like what we saw last year with the Texas Alabama argument. Well, is Bama the better team now? When we got to the end of the season, even though Texas beat them, uh, obviously earlier in Tuscaloosa. And then I think what you brought up, Turner, with the possibility of another conference getting a bid, I think we see a possibility this year. It's very realistic because right now in the AP poll, you look and right on the heels of the highest ranked ACC team in Miami is Ashton Jeanty, looking like Michael Myers back there. And he sees something, and he sees a possible home playoff game, or not a home playoff game because it would be a bye, actually, now, a top 4 seed for the Boise State Broncos. Now, is that very feasible? I mean, I think it is, but obviously it depends on how SMU, Miami perform the rest of the season. I don't think there's a world where the committee puts a one-loss Boise State over a one-loss ACC champion in the rankings just for the sake of, I guess, power conference affiliation. But I think it's an interesting debate to have, especially since Boise State's lone loss is against the consensus number one team in the country right now.
Yeah, the interesting thing will be if Miami can win out, because obviously Wake Forest they should win, but Syracuse, I think this is an important game to look at. Last game of the season for Miami. Obviously, Syracuse has not played to the levels that they were expected to initially. But Kyle McCord is a dog of a quarterback. They have a great receiving core. Gadsden at tight end is amazing. I think they're a well coached team in general. They've had some issues. They had some bad losses, but I think that last week of the season, people should be marking their calendars if they're big Ashton Genty fans. That Boise State at large bid is could be kind of on that Syracuse winning that game. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out there. Well, on to news this week. How are y'all feeling with the college basketball format right now? How are you feeling going in? Anything notable that y'all are seeing in general? I have some thoughts, but I'd love to get y'all's first.
I know personally, Ole Miss, uh, slightly a slow start. Despite some of the final scores, we it's very scary. And I like IU's game was this afternoon. Halftime, you're freaking out. And then second half we kind of figured out. But when we start playing, these conference games, you don't have a first half to figure it out. So I would. I mean, it's the beginning of the season. Teams are going to get better. Teams are going to get comfortable. But iffy start, to say the least.
I could speak the same for the Texas Longhorns. You watch that Ohio State game and you give up over 80 points, and it's like, well, the defense isn't very good. Which in the game on Friday night back in Austin against Houston Christian was confirmed. That was a 7 point game at halftime. Felt like, I mean, they were shooting the ball pretty well. You don't know really how we were going to come out, and then you bank on a 20-2 run, to start the second half, puts the game out of reach. So Trey Johnson is an absolute dog. He is the next Kevin Durant. I'm completely convinced of that. But that Kevin Durant Texas team lost in the second round. So I mean, I would much rather have a deep tournament run
Mhm.
than a top prospect. But we'll have to see what Rodney Terry can get going with the boys. Elsewhere, I mean, how about Auburn? You come the day after your flight has to get grounded for a fight on the plane amongst players, and then you go into Texas and you beat Houston. I mean, that's a signature win for Bruce Pearl in the non-conference, the highest ranked win in Auburn history in a non-conference game. And with Janai Broom back, with some of the guys that Auburn's going to be bringing back, if they can get past a first-round game against a Yale like they were unable to do last year, Auburn's dangerous. And then elsewhere, I mean, Baylor Gonzaga was a rout, but then Baylor comes back and beats Arkansas. So what really do we know? Not much. Like Eli said, teams get better, teams get worse. Injuries happen. A whole lot can happen. We're a week into the basketball season. A lot to still figure out. We'll have big games this week moving forward.
Yeah, I'm definitely in that boat. I mean, Eli mentioned it today. I mean, IU was down by one at halftime, and then came out in the second half, and we allowed 18 points in the second half total, which is great, and we scored a ton. But I think we're getting to a point. We're getting into the season. We're getting to some the bigger of the non-conference games. No one's playing East, West, Lafayette, Tech. Now we're playing some real teams. Um, I think that Auburn win is interesting. Obviously, Bruce Pearl, I think, is one of the more underrated coaches right now in the college basketball world. Um, I think if you're in the SEC, you might hear him talked about. But I grew up an ACC fan, and I wasn't super familiar with him. So, Bruce Pearl is a name that people need to be paying attention to. And other things going on. I'm feeling the Big Ten is being disrespected right now as far as a conference. All these recently, RedCup News, our conglomerate here, has put out a ranking for having us as the fifth ranked conference in college basketball, and I'm not quite having that. I think the beauty of the Big Ten compared to other conferences is that you can really go into any game, and any game can be a close game. Kind of like the SEC in football, there are no easy games in the Big Ten for basketball. Anyone can lose away at Minnesota, in Minneapolis, at the barn. Anyone can lose away at Rutgers, and Rutgers is going to be great this year too. So I'm curious to see how this season will shake out. I think there are some teams that look really good, and we'll talk about them coming up. But I think I'm excited. I'm excited for this season, and it's been an interesting first week for sure.
I
On that
feel
topic,
go
go
for
ahead,
it.
Eli.
Nope.
Okay, on that topic of Big Ten basketball being disrespected. Now, I'm not one to make too big of a deal about rankings here, but highest preseason ranked Big Ten team is Purdue, all the way down at number 14. Now, how much do you take into account those rankings, and how much is that? Well, Purdue lost Zach Edey. Uh, that's up to each and every person to decide. But you look at the Southeastern Conference. I mean, for me and Eli's perspective, at least, I know Horns have a gauntlet. I mean, you're looking at A&M is ranked, Tennessee is ranked, Auburn is ranked, Ole Miss is ranked, Texas is ranked, Alabama's preseason the best team in the country. We expect Nate Oates is going to run and gun with those guys and get them back to the Final Four, hopefully. Um, I mean, the Big Ten with Indiana's going to be improved this year. I think Mike Woods is going to do a good job with that team. I think they're better than Purdue, honestly, but I'm a Purdue hater. Besides that, I mean, you're looking at Michigan State, maybe. I mean, see what they are this week. They'll have a big one against Kansas. That'll be a good barometer for them. But I think, respectfully, we need to talk about Big Ten basketball the same way we talk about ACC football.
I will say, Blaine, I know we talked about this earlier. Ohio State, uh, are they frauds? Was it a one game thing? Uh, do we put this game solely in the hands of John Mobley Jr.? Pulling up from almost half court, but definitely the logo multiple times, 4 for 4 from three. Uh, kind of put that game out of reach for you guys. And like Turner said, there's some Big Ten teams that won't look very good on paper, but on any day and any night can go out and beat anybody in the country. Like we see with Northwestern, every time Purdue goes to Northwestern, chaos ensues. Um, so I mean, it's early. It's really hard to make claims now, but I'm going to put it out here. I'm going to put my golden coin of the year on John Mobley Jr., breakout star of the year, freshman at Ohio State.
I'm excited. I don't know. We'll see. I'm with you. I understand the argument of ranked teams, and I understand that that's a thing. But I think there's a difference between the ACC in football and the Big Ten in basketball. And the difference is, I don't think that the bottom of the big ACC in football can beat anyone in the country. I do think the bottom of the Big Ten in basketball has a shot against most teams. And I think that's the difference. But it's up for debate, and we'll see how it shakes out. We got some big matchups coming up this week. The earliest of which is one I really want to talk about, which is Duke versus Kentucky and Kansas versus Michigan State are both Tuesday night games. That Duke versus Kentucky game, I am so excited to watch because to me, Duke looks like, I mean, that team is insane. Between Cooper Flag and Knipple, I mean, they're a little young, I think is their only issue, but I mean, that team, the sky's the limit. They look so good. I think Cooper Flag will be the best player in the country this year. I don't think that's too bold of a take, really, given just how highly touted he was. But I'm excited for that game, and I'm excited to see more of this Duke team post Coach K and seeing how they redefine themselves as a program.
My only worry there, I mean, with most large basketball universities. Obviously, basketball is a much younger sport than any other sport in the country, with the one and done. And obviously, forget Cooper Flag. He's proved himself. We know that age isn't going to be an issue with him. But you look at a guy like Knipple. He's played well, but he's a freshman. He's a young guy that doesn't have the experience that Flag has, and along with some of their other big guys. The experience isn't there, and I know it's not as big of a deal in basketball as it is in other sports. But I think down the line, in some big moments like we're going to see in this Kentucky game, can they hold? Um, and who knows? I just think we're going to have to wait and see before I personally make any huge decisions about how I feel about that Duke team as a whole.
Yeah, I mean that Duke Kentucky game. You look at, I mean, for Mark Pope, it's a big game if he can win this one to shut up the people who thought that he was the lowest tier hire that Kentucky could have gotten. It's a massive game for him. Talk about John Shire, developing his own image post Coach K. I mean, you make it to the Elite Eight last year, you lose to NC State. They need tournament success. He needs. I think this would be a big win for him. Obviously, national game. You're getting Champions Classic. These games always seem to deliver. I mean, no matter how good the teams are. I mean, you look at Duke and Kansas for top 10 teams. Kentucky's ranked, but Michigan State's unranked. I mean, I'm excited to see what Cohen Card Company can do against Kansas. As a Kansas team that, after blowing a 20-point lead against North Carolina at Allen Fieldhouse, you find a way to win the game. That's what Bill Self is going to do. Obviously, I mean, coming from the Big 12, moving to the SEC this year, I'm a Bill Self hater. I'm a Kansas hater. But you can't deny that that's a really good Kansas team. And they're kind of the aberration compared to the other top ranked teams, really, in this Champions Classic, because you look at the experience on this Kansas roster, and all of a sudden it's Hunter Dickinson. You bring in AJ Storr out of the transfer portal. You bring in Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State. That's a couple big additions, and then you still return DeJuan Harris. So that's going to be a really experienced Kansas team, I feel like. Now, how much does that help them come tournament time? How much does it help them throughout the course of the year? Hunter Dickinson has to stay healthy. But, I mean, Kansas is going to be in it till the end along with the best of them. I think it's a big week, obviously, in college basketball. We'll learn a lot on Tuesday.
I agree. It feels like we've been talking about Dickinson for a decade at this point, with how long he's been in the league, whether it's his fifth or sixth year, I don't know. But you feel like, barring some crazy injury again, this will be his last one. Where do you guys see him going at the draft? Do you think he has projectability at the next level? Or do you think because of his age, teams kind of pass up on him?
I see him in a similar realm as Luca Garza. Somebody who's an elite player at a college level and who's phenomenal. I mean, Luca Garza. I mean, go back and watch some of those games. I mean, he was great for Iowa for a few of those years. But I think Hunter Dickinson, he's good. He's not great. And I think we saw this. I personally watched this happen last year. Indiana plays Kansas. Indiana's center last year was Khalil Ware, who is now the center, or he's playing for the Miami Heat. And he's been pretty great for the Miami Heat. And I think the key difference you saw was, Khalil Ware spaced out better. He had the better build. And, even though we lost that game, it was a closer game than it should have been, from Kansas' perspective. Um, you really saw that difference. The what the NBA is looking for is a different level than what you know the college game is looking for. And I think people kind of misjudged Zach Edey in that regard too, and they said he was in that similar category with Luka Garza. But I think the shot blocking of Zach Edey puts him in a different category than Luka Garza, and just that size, that unique size, um, which you saw with Khalil Ware, which is, I think, important. So Hunter Dickinson, I think he falls in a similar category as Luka Garza and even Umar Ballo for Indiana, another 6-year player. Um, it's a tough road ahead, and I'm not saying that he can't have success, but it doesn't look great for a draft from a draft perspective. Blaine, do you have any thoughts on that?
Y'all hit the nail on the head, I think, with Dickinson. I mean, as a Zach Ediator, I mean, I have to give you credit for that one. I mean, the shot blocking skills. I mean, it comes with the territory being 7'4", you know. I mean, as much as it's pained me to say, he's played pretty well in Memphis
Yeah.
here early on in the season. Um, I will say, I mean, Dickinson, he's relatively capable as a 3-point shooter. I mean, you look at the splits.
Mhm.
I mean, career, he's going to be hovering 36% maybe around the 3-point line, but I don't see enough. I feel like defensively is a place he gets exposed at the professional level. Obviously, I don't think he extends well enough out there. I mean, he can. Yeah, I mean, he comes down as a trailer in transition. You can give him the ball at the top of the key, and he can make a three every once in a while. But I think defensively he gets exposed, and then I just completely agree with you. I think I hit the nail on the head.
Well, I mean, we just talked about this Kansas team. I mean, who do y'all have as this Kansas Michigan State game? I mean, obviously Kansas number one team in the country. I mean, what do you think? You know, does Michigan State have a chance? I would say they do, but and I think they were a really disappointing team last year, but I think they always have a chance. But I'm curious your thoughts as people who are outside the Big Ten.
I think that now, I mean, we know at least the past 5 years or so. I mean, Izzo's great in March. You know, I mean, January, February, Izzo. We all hear it. We need to see it in the regular season at a certain point. You know, I mean, it's great to win a couple tournament games as a 7, maybe 6 seed. Ultimately, if you want to have national championship aspirations, you basically have to be in that top 4, top 5 seed range. I mean, Connecticut winning as a 5 seed was a bit of an outlier. So you have to be one of the 20 highest touted teams going into the tournament. I think with Cohen Carr coming back, this is a Michigan State team that can compete. I mean, Kansas is going to want to put up a lot of points on Michigan State. We'll have to see how well Michigan State wants to negate that, or if they want to try to run with them. We saw how that worked out for North Carolina, turned into a track meet, at 92-89. So that could be a really high scoring one. I mean, I'm not going to pick against Kansas because, I mean, what do you have to go off of? I mean, they just beat a top 10 team in North Carolina that I think is going to be pretty good in the ACC this year. Hubert Davis always does a good job. But before you have to pick Kansas, but do not underestimate Izzo.
Mhm. I'm looking at this matchup down low right now of Dickinson versus Xavier Booker, a kid from my hometown. So I just want to give him a little bit of a shout out. He loses in the weight territory here, and so I think that game. I mean, obviously Kansas has great perimeter. They got great guards coming back, but I think the majority of that game is going to take place downstairs, just with the weight matchup and Dickinson potentially being able to move him around a lot more um, than you'd want him to as a Michigan State fan. Um, I think that's a great matchup to look out for to see if Dickinson can play like Dickinson has, like we know he can, um, and a potential breaking point for Michigan State defense.
Are there any other college basketball games y'all wanted to talk about in this next week coming up?
Shit.
I mean, we want to look at one. I mean, the only other real interesting game besides we look ahead to A&M, Ohio State, see if the Buckeyes are for real. A good gauge for that Big Ten, like we were just talking about. You're going to put your preseason best team up against the preseason SEC best team. You're going to get Bama, Purdue. We're going to see how well the Boilermakers replace Zach Edey. I mean, now we've seen the video of however tall the new kid they have there is going to be. I have not watched Purdue film, but I know what I'm going to get from Alabama, and I like that Alabama team. Nate Oates is going to do a really good job with them. I mean, last year that was a really competitive game with two teams that preseason were highly touted. Purdue had the better regular season, but they both ended up in the Final Four. I think this time the roles are kind of reversed. Alabama's supposed to be the better team. I'm going to pick Alabama, but it would not surprise me at all. Obviously, we look at these early season games. We don't know who anybody is at this point. We watched Gonzaga smack Baylor all the way back to Waco from Spokane earlier last week, and then Baylor comes back and beats what we think is going to be a pretty good Arkansas team with Coach Cal. So anything can happen on any night. But Bama Purdue, a game to watch out for, a gauge for both the SEC and the Big Ten. and I think bigger for that last year's national runner-up Purdue to see what they're going to do this season.
I'm looking at the state of Florida matchup here. Slightly smaller game, definitely not anywhere near um, as big as that Alabama Purdue game. But I know the state of Florida is very excited for this one. Florida State's finally getting some hope in their lives. That very rough football season that they're having. It's at Florida State. Florida is at 21 right now, 2-0. Both teams are 2-0. Florida team that struggled early against USF, but came back and won handedly in that game. But with it being at Florida State and after watching Florida for the past couple of years, Florida has the tendency to fold in big moments. And this early in the season, I'm just curious to see if Florida is going to be as good as people say they are, or if are they another inexperienced team that's going to turn the ball over a lot, make a lot of mistakes, and end up giving the game away. Just have to wait and see.
I think it's interesting to see how Florida reacts going on the road now with the stuff we've heard out of Coach Golden, obviously. I mean, I want to put a crowd mic right in front of the Florida State student section and just
Mhm.
have a live feed coming to my house so I can hear what they're going to be saying to him. Um, what does Florida want to do with him? We don't know, but it's obviously an outside distraction. Uh, as a guy who had Chris Beard get fired early in the season, I mean, it either galvanizes a team or it tears them down. For us, it was lucky enough Rodney Terry brought that team together, got into the Elite Eight. I don't know how this Florida team reacts without having prior success with Al Golden.
Well, I'm going to add to both of those. I'm curious about this Florida State game. I'm always curious to see how these ACC schools end up doing on the road, or playing against a good team out of conference. I think Florida will win. They look to be the better team on paper, but I wouldn't count out Florida State. We'll see. And I think those students obviously are going to be ready for something because they haven't had much to be happy about. So I wouldn't be shocked if they really rallied around this basketball team, because I know what that's like. I know what it's like to have a really bad football team and really only care about basketball. That was the Indiana way for a really long time, and now we're 10-0 in football, which is kind of insane. But I think that there's something to be said for a student base that needs a win. So I think that there's always something there. As far as the Purdue Alabama game goes, I'm gonna agree with y'all. I'm gonna go against kind of what I said. I was defending the Big Ten conference here, and now I'm gonna go against what I was saying, because well, I wouldn't be doing my duty as an Indiana fan to not cheer against Purdue, but even more than that, I think the Purdue team has some flaws. They've got a 7'4" kid. They've got Braden Smith, and they've got Fletcher Lawyer back. Fletcher Lawyer, I would say he's one of the most elite 3-point shooters in the country. And then Braden Smith, I'm curious about Braden Smith. Braden Smith, to me, can be. I'm wondering if he'll end up being a little bit of a do nothing player. I wonder if he'll end up being similar to Gabe Cupps from Indiana. Somebody who's not quite a great scorer, and a great, just kind of good facilitator and good assister. But I think Purdue might need more than that. And I think the point guard position right now in college basketball is something that every team needs. And is Braden Smith going to get the production levels that Purdue needs this season without having Edie there as a support? So I'm curious to see what happens with this Purdue team, but I don't think that they have made enough great acquisitions, and I don't think they've kept enough people to be at the level they were at last year. So I'm curious.
uh, Braden Smith, or as I like to relate him to, Jason Williams. I watched him play in high school. He grew up about 20 minutes away from me, so I've seen him play since eighth grade freshman year. This guy can score the ball. He didn't have to a lot the last couple of years with Edie, but I mean, it's been a couple of years, but I think from what I've seen, he's got more than enough talent and ability to go out and score. I know it's a lot different, high school to college, all of that. but I think the talent is there. Can he step up? Being asked to do a lot more offensively, that's the question. But from me, the talent is there. There's no question. I watched him with a broken rib pull up from the logo 6 times in a game, straight cash, put 30 on us in a sectional game. I do not question the offensive ability from him and Lawyer. I'd like to see how a 7'4" freshman fits in, but I just think the question is, can he step up rather than is he talented enough?
Yeah. Well, I think we've got a good week of college basketball, not a great week coming up, but we do have another kind of lackluster football week, but there are some really interesting matchups as far on the college football side of things, and I'm gonna hand it off to y'all to start, you know, sharing your thoughts.
So we'll take a look. Texas goes to Fayetteville. Obviously, Quinn Ewers looks a lot better. We talked about that earlier. I mean, he looked like his Heisman caliber self that we wanted preseason. Now, as a Texas fan, uh, Eli has mentioned this. You think that that's a trap game, but for Ole Miss, it wasn't a trap game. I think this is an Arkansas team coming off of a bye. Obviously, you're looking at 5-4. I mean, middle of the pack in the SEC, but there's something about Sam Pittman in Arkansas whenever they get into one of these games. Like I thought we'd see it against LSU. I thought we'd see it against Ole Miss. I picked Arkansas in both of those games. I was proven wrong in both of those games, and pretty passionately, I was proved wrong. Um, Arkansas has a very deep disdain for Texas. That 2021 game, I mean that was it served as a catapult for that Arkansas season with KJ Jefferson. I mean, they stomped all over Texas, and that's whenever we just started to talk about like, well, is Texas ready for the SEC? And luckily now, seems like Steve Sarkisian's gotten the boys ready. But I think it's the perfect barometer. It's beautiful irony the fact that Texas now gets to go to Arkansas, a game that they lost. I think it was 40-14 in 2021 now, and I mean, Taylon Green's a solid quarterback. I would not be surprised if this is a defensive 10-7, 14-10 kind of game at halftime. I think Texas ultimately pulls away because I don't trust the Arkansas defense enough to hold down Quinn Ewers and company and the Steve Sarkisian play calling. But I have a feeling this is a game that the Hogs keep close for a while. And we have some doubts about Texas early on.
From an Ole Miss perspective on that game, what really made the difference for us was our pass rush. And I think looking at the Texas defensive unit, I think y'all are not short in that area either. I think your defense is going to handle business, and if you can continue to get pressure on the quarterback like you guys have done all year, it should be no issue. Obviously, miracles happen, but the spread's at 16.5. I don't see an issue with that at all. So.
Well, I think another interesting game we were talking about for now. I mean, I think Eli wanted to talk about, but it was Utah Colorado, and that potentially being a trap game for Colorado there as they move into that CFP picture, playing potentially BYU in that championship game.
I think it's a game that before this past weekend, it goes completely overlooked. But now you're forced to look at it after that Utah, the Holy War matchup, as they call it. And some may say Utah was cheated out of it. Some may say flag's a flag. They get the sack, but they get the hold. And football is a game of penalties. Sometimes you lose with penalties. Sometimes you win with penalties. Uh, There's nobody really in the middle. It's split a lot of ways on that. But Utah played a really, really solid football game against a team that's ranked ninth in the country right now. Um, I know that was in Utah. This one will be in Colorado. Makes a huge difference. But I think that with the spread at 10 there, uh, I wouldn't be surprised if Utah keeps it close and is potentially able to cover that, if not win. If they can keep the energy that they're coming off from the Holy War and not lose hope in the season.
I agree. I mean, I'm a big fan of Kyle Whittingham. I love what he does at Utah. I mean, consistently doing less with more. I mean, I think he's a better version of Kirk Ferentz over at Iowa. Um, he's going to have his team ready. I mean, that's a team. I mean, we saw the athletic director come into the press conference, something you never see. ADs never do a press conference after a game. He
Mm-mm.
comes and he sits down for 20 seconds and he says, "We were cheated out of this game. I'm going to talk to the commissioner." And then he gets up and walks out. So it's going to be a motivated Utah team that has greatly underperformed this season for a variety of reasons. You can look at Cam Rising, you can look at defense. I mean, there's a lot of areas Utah needs to be better in. It's going to be a hard nosed brand of football. I think it'll be interesting to see because the indictment of Deion Sanders at Colorado has been a lack of play up front. So if Utah can control that line of scrimmage, maybe get a little bit of pressure on Shadur Sanders, we could get a game in Boulder. But I mean, the way that Colorado's been playing, it's obviously tough to pick against them.
Mm.
And right now, they have an inside track to the Big 12 championship, and I think it would be a fun, interesting game in Arlington if we get Colorado BYU.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't know. I think this Colorado BYU matchup seems to be on a collision course, but yeah, the Utes are not to be counted out. Um, well, we're looking down the slate here. Um, well, I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't see any way Alabama wins that game, but Eli, you had some thoughts.
About the Alabama game, Alabama
Y-
Mercer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Alabama Mercer game. Look at a Mercer team that's 9-1. Um, we've seen Alabama come out slow at halftime, even in the Saban era against a couple teams. The USF game, obviously, a couple years ago. Look, Alabama's going to win this game, but I just think we could see a little halftime graphic from Alabama here in a game that is way closer than it needs to be against a Mercer team I mean, not an SEC school, not even a Power Five school at all, but at 9-1 is not a rollover. You got to show up and actually play football to win this game. You can't just roll out of bed, with your pajamas on. So I mean, they've handled business this year against some teams. Um, could be sneaky. I don't know. The spread isn't out yet, but I could be looking at something there potentially. Um, but you never know. I think Alabama knows there's too much on the line in this game and won't have an issue. But part of my heart says there's going to be a halftime graphic that we might be seeing.
As we move into the evening, Arizona State, K State, and well, actually before that, Virginia Notre Dame. I just want to point this game out as the potential trap game for what some people are considering a pretty fraudulent Notre Dame team. Virginia just had a win against Pitt. I don't know how good Virginia is really. Shout out my boy Justin Stewart on the team, but we'll see. We'll see what Jay Stu and the boys can do um, against Notre Dame.
Yeah, I'm not a big Riley Leonard fan at all. I don't think he's a very good quarterback. I don't think he will ever be a very good quarterback. I mean, I'm saying that from a dorm, not a dorm room, but an apartment as a NARP. But I don't see him being very good. I don't think he's very good this year. I'm writing him off.
Anything for Notre Dame is sneaky. We watched this team lose to Northern Illinois. I mean, Virginia's hot. You beat what was probably a pretty overrated Pitt team because they hadn't played Jack anybody the entire season. But like we say, anything could happen. We were talking about Mercer, Alabama. We have to talk about Virginia, Notre Dame.
Yep.
But I mean, the bigger game of that pre Tennessee Georgia slate, obviously, like you mentioned it, Arizona, Kansas State, the Big 12 and ACC. Obviously, we look at them maybe being disrespected, maybe not being disrespected because we think the caliber of teams just aren't as good. But in that Big 12 race, we were talking about BYU, Colorado. Everybody else has at least two losses, and this is two of those teams that are sitting there at 7-2, 4-2 in the conference. It's a Big 12 championship eliminator for that possible automatic bid. Now, if one of these teams were to win the conference, it's probably not an automatic bid, and that probably gives it to Boise State. But that's a whole other can of worms we'd have to open up. I think Cam Skattebo is awesome. I've watched Cam Skattebo run all over a bunch of teams. I watched them run all over Texas State. I thought Texas State was going to beat that Arizona State team in San Marcos earlier in the season. And then what can Avery Johnson do? Kansas State has dropped the two conference games, and it's kind of inexplicable losses that they've taken. Like you lose a game to Houston for some reason. Um, but I expect Kansas State to get up. They do. They go to Manhattan, so it should be an interesting game for sure. I mean, I'm going to take Arizona State. I think I like what Cam Scadaboo has going. I like the quarterback Levitt coming in there, and Kansas State. I mean, Avery Johnson's cool. I don't really trust him throwing the ball that well against the Arizona State defense. One of these teams is going to have to stay with those two conference losses, try to keep pace with Colorado, and I like Arizona State.
I mean, this is an Arizona State team that beat a 16th ranked Utah earlier in the year. Um, and looking ahead here, if they are able to pull this game out in Kansas against Kansas State, they're playing BYU next week at home with a chance to get that signature win in that Big 12 championship berth. And so there's a lot on the line for this game. One for next week, and one just I mean huge implications this week. If they lose this week, who really cares? Maybe they lay an egg against BYU, but you come out of this week with a win. Um, there's a lot of potential with that BYU game right there. After watching them play against Utah this past weekend, to beat them and to get potentially even into the CFP with a Big Ten championship win.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched a ton of either of these two teams. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I just haven't watched a ton of the Big 12. What I have been watching, of course, is Colorado because I mean, everyone talks about them. So I watched that Colorado Kansas State game. It was a close game, but Kansas State looks really good. I like them. I think that they're defensively they're pretty solid. Um, but I'm with y'all in that Arizona State has got a chip on their shoulder and some urgency here. I think this is a big game for both these teams, and I think that's not to be underrated right now. So we'll see who can handle the pressure and how much playing at home matters for Kansas State too. Then we move into the final game of the week here. Well, not final game of the week, but the game everyone's talking about. Um, you know, is this a playoff eliminator game? Maybe, but we'll see.
I think for Georgia it is. If you move down to three losses, I think with what we're seeing from the rest of the country, three losses is going to take you out. It's going to be in Athens. Uh, I don't know. I think Tennessee loses this game, they've still got a chance, but there's too many good football teams. The country is heavily favoring Georgia right now, but after seeing one, the entire team, two, their offensive coordinator, in my opinion, has no idea what he's doing. I mean, they're down by 20 points and they're throwing screen passes with 2 minutes left in the game. I don't know. I think this is a very beatable Georgia team. I've been saying it all year. I think Tennessee could walk into Athens with a chip on their shoulder and come out of here as a 9-1 team, still sitting atop the CFB.
I agree. It's a eliminator game for Georgia. You cannot drop this game. You're already outside the top 10 in the AP poll. We'll see what the CFP rankings are. Three losses. This is your last real chance at a signature win if you're Georgia. So it's a gotta have game. I mean, game day is going to be in Athens. It's going to be hopping, and for Josh Heupel in Tennessee, this is a game that I mean he's had this circled for 3 years. Really, I mean they had that Hendon Hooker team ranked number one in the CFP poll, and then you go into Athens and you drop a game to Stetson Bennett after we had the fiasco of Tennessee fans getting his phone number. Um, and him calling them after he scores multiple rushing touchdowns. Iconic Stetson Bennett moment, obviously. And then last year, you get another shot at Georgia. You bring them to Neyland, and you just kind of get dominated in that game. We've seen Josh Heupel has built Tennessee into a team that can compete with Alabama. But Alabama isn't the class of the SEC anymore. It's Georgia, or at least it has been prior to this year. So I think it's somewhat a prove-it game for Josh Heupel to see if he can be at that upper echelon. And I mean, the easiest route to the SEC championship for Tennessee is you win out because either Texas or Texas A&M is taking a loss in that game on November 30th. So the Volunteers can get past this one. You do have to play Vandy to close out the season, but it's two slow starting teams. Obviously, we could have a 3-0 game at halftime, but it's going to be interesting for sure if Nico and the boys can go into Samford and get that thing done.
Yeah, I'm excited for this game. I wonder what's going to happen as far as like what happens if Georgia wins. What does that look like? And as an Indiana fan, I was happy that Georgia lost this week, but now I'm cheering for the Georgia win to get Tennessee out of the way. So I'm curious, and I'm optimistic um, in that regard. Um, but it's I think again you just can't underrate playing on the road in the SEC. It's a tough thing to do. It's the best conference right now, clearly, and I think it'd be tough to not pick Georgia right now. But
Yeah,
we'll
this
see.
is I would say underrated Tennessee defense. They've given up 19 points. I mean, no more than 19 points all year. That came in a loss against Arkansas, but they hold Alabama to 17. They Oklahoma to 15. They gave up 10 against NC State when they were ranked. This is a very, very solid defense. This team's been consistent all year. They've scored anywhere from 20 to 30 points a game, uh, but only given up 10 to 15 on average. Um, we'll see. I mean, they haven't played a Georgia caliber team yet. Uh, I don't think. I mean, Alabama maybe, but that was also in Tennessee, so you never know. But I think this could be another underrated defensive matchup.
It does feel like this is the stereotypical "oh boohoo, we're underrating Georgia" game, like what we saw when they came to Austin.
Mhm.
I mean, Kirby Smart's going to tell his boys this whole week, nobody's picking us. And that's exactly what that team thrives off of. That's what he told them 2 years ago when Tennessee came in there ranked number one. That's what he told them when they came to Austin earlier in the season. We saw how they responded apart from Carson Beck. I mean, we talked about Carson Beck earlier. What does he have for us? I mean, can he at least be a competent quarterback? I think if he can be a competent quarterback, Georgia really has a good look in this game. I mean, the defense is going to be fired up. They're going to I have nightmares about the exotic blitz packages they brought against Texas in that game. So if they can heat up Nico Iamaleava in his first, really, he's been to Fayetteville, obviously, which at night, I mean, Fayetteville's a great atmosphere. He hasn't been to Athens, Georgia. I mean, that's going to be a different beast for him. Um, I would not be. I mean, I I don't think Georgia is better than Tennessee, but it's weird to say that. Like I could get a vibe of like a 31-14 kind of game from this, just because Georgia comes out and dominates because they're pissed off. But we'll see how that shakes out on Saturday.
We talked about it earlier with the Ole Miss game, and how the pressure from Ole Miss is able to make Carson Beck make bad decisions. We've seen it all year. When under duress, Carson Beck cannot keep his nuts together. Uh, he ends up throwing the balls up where they shouldn't be thrown. He puts his head down in the pocket and gets sacked. Um, I think again, like we talked about with Ole Miss, if they can get pressure on Carson Beck, I think they're going to force him to make mistakes, and it's going to be really, really hard to get over those humps.
Yeah. Really quickly, because I know a lot of people are circling this 7:30 Eastern time slot for Tennessee, Georgia. But keep your eyes on the ticker for this Oregon Wisconsin game. Oregon really doesn't have much left on their schedule. I think they're probably going to go undefeated. But Wisconsin's looked decent. They've looked capable. Um, I'm curious to see as a Big Ten fan. But the other one to look at is this Kansas BYU game. We've talked a lot about BYU. Um, Kansas, I mean, they got a good win this weekend. So
Mhm.
against Iowa State, who a lot of people thought were really good. So I want to see what this game holds too. So for those of you who, in case this Georgia game is a blowout in either way, maybe turn on the Wisconsin game or see if BYU will fumble the perfect record.
I'm looking at Vegas here. Vegas is telling me this game could be decided by 2.5 points. Uh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know enough about Kansas, but I know BYU. Looking at a 9-0 versus a 3-6, I don't see it. But obviously, Vegas knows more than we do. I think this could be a really, really interesting game at night.
What I will say is that Kansas record of 3-6, I feel like is not telling of the team that they are because you go early in the season, they drop a game to UNLV, who's turned out to be a pretty solid Group of Five team. Um, you lose in Champaign against Illinois. Those are two easily winnable games, and all of a sudden they're 5-4, and we're looking at bowl eligibility for them. Jalen Daniels, quality quarterback. I mean, Kansas is going to have a shot.
Hmm.
I think it's just a question of how much they can hurt BYU with that quarterback run because that's what Jalen Daniels is going to give you with his mobility. It's an element that Utah does not have, so that's a different wrinkle for BYU to have to deal with. And I mean, the Holy War, you come off a win like that. Talk about a letdown with Alabama playing Mercer. I mean, BYU just, Utah's owned them as of late. You got a big emotional win on the road in Salt Lake City. Could be letdown territory for BYU, and I could bite at the 2.5 if Vegas gives us that.
See, I'm looking at the this past schedule here for Kansas, and I mean, like you said, only one game has been decided by more than one score all season. Uh, I mean, these are games like with the Ole Miss LSU game are decided by one drive, one play. 5 plays happen. They could be, 7-2. They could be really, really, really competitive team. Um, I think it's very easy to overlook that matchup, but it'll be great to have it on that night.
Okay. This has been the Cupdate, y'all. We appreciate you listening. We're going to keep adding sections each week to encompass more of what RedCup does and represents. If there's more things that you guys would like to see, please let us know. And have a great week.